Let's get started. Hi, everyone, and welcome to our second webinar in our Flex Your Power series, today focused on EVs and storage. By way of background, this series has been designed to engage with the Flex provider community and to share insight into the potential value that can be unlocked by participating in local Flex markets. Most importantly, we have our special guests with us, and they're going to share their top tips from their own experience in participating in these markets. At the end of the session, we'll be hosting a detailed Q&A, so please make sure to add your questions in the Q&A in the Teams link, and we will make sure we address them after the final presentation. Last thing from me, before we kick off, this webinar has been co-organized with the help of the REA, and with that, I'll pass you over to Jordan, who will give us a markets and policy overview. Over to you, Jordan.
Cheers, thanks a lot. Morning, everyone. So as you see on the slide, my name is Jordan Dilworth. I'm a policy analyst at the REA, where I primarily focus on solar and energy storage. I've been asked just to provide a quick policy and market update on flexibility markets, but also the wider flexibility piece. So just over the next 5 to 10 minutes, I plan to provide a very high-level overview of flexibility markets, why there's an opportunity within the UK, and what are some of the key policy areas that we're looking at the moment, and ways that we can go forward. So if we could move to the next slide, I just want to start off very quickly by thinking about actually what flexibility is. And I think it's a good way then to understand what are some of the opportunities. So something the REA launched earlier this month was our Energy Transition Readiness Index, which ranks certain European countries based upon their readiness for the energy transition, but really focusing on flexibility and the necessity of that. And within that, we define flexibility in a very broad way as the ability of electricity generation or customer demand to increase or decrease supply and demand. Flexibility resources are needed on a continuous basis to stabilize the electricity system within operational limits, especially when unexpected changes occur. Now, I mean, we've intentionally used quite a broad definition of flexibility, but what I think I really want to draw out is that as we move away from fossil fuel generation and carbon intensive generation, what this means is that there'll be increased electrification of our energy system, and especially from variable generation sources, which requires us to then have flexibility assets to really manage that supply and demand, the increased demand that becomes from electrification, but also the variability of it. And the other thing I would like to highlight, and I've tried to draw this out using the image on the right, is that we're also moving to a more decentralized form of energy system. So previously, when you have with fossil fuel assets, you have very big centralized systems that really are coordinated on a national basis. And as we move to then a more decentralized and smaller system, we really need to have those flexibility assets in place and the markets in order to provide that coordination function when you have a more decentralized energy system in place. So I just wanted to quickly provide that before moving on to the next slide, which really focuses on what the challenges that we have. So this is taken from the report that I mentioned earlier. It might not make a lot of sense if you haven't read the report, but I'll provide a very quick explanation that on the left-hand side, you can see that this is based upon the investment attractiveness and our rankings that we provided. But I think what's really interesting to kind of draw out in this is that the kind of like size of the circles that you can see is based upon each country's targets for renewable generation by 2030, and then the flexibility assets that will be required to ensure that that renewable generation can actually provide the intended goals of a percentage of the overall country's energy mix. So as you can see, Germany has the biggest gap between its renewable ambitions and the flexibility assets and resources required. But in second place is the UK. And while there's a worrying part of this in the sense of being able to bridge that gap, there's also a real big opportunity here for development of flexibility markets, the potential of energy storage and EV to be able to try and bridge that. I think it really should be seen as an opportunity within the UK. So now I've kind of set the scene with flexibility and what the challenge is, I wanted to focus on a few of some of the key policy areas that we've been working on to provide some insight into those. So go to the next slide, please. So in the previous work that we've done, continuing work for us really, is looking at longer duration energy storage. So about 2 years ago, we published a report on this, which is really to look at energy storage devices, which we define really as, we've used the term longer duration to capture energy storage devices that provide energy storage beyond 8 hours really. So this includes medium storage devices and the more long interseasonal storage devices. And what we really call within that is a cap and floor mechanism. And to explain a little bit more about that, the current state of the market is that for the technology exists and we represent all forms of energy storage, so from flywheels to battery storage and thermal, etc. But the difficulty is at the moment, these energy storage devices, they provide different flexibility services. So from the short term to long term to restarting up the energy system, it's quite difficult to model that in terms of the investment case for it. So what we've been advocating for through this report, but also through our conversations with government, is for a consistent revenue stream provided by a cap and floor mechanism that would be able to provide a constant source of revenue and provide the business case and investment opportunities for that. So that's something that we feel is really key to unlocking that market and being able to provide a route to market for these particular pieces of technology. I also wanted to mention a little bit more depth about the report that I mentioned earlier. So part of those recommendations is the acknowledgement that because this flexibility gap does exist, what we do need is a broad range of flexibility assets and resources in order to bridge that gap. So while energy storage is important, there's also demand side response changes, looking at really creating flexibility markets that are the deep markets and that allows flexibility assets to compete fairly with carbon intensive assets as well. So the work that Piclo is doing at the moment based upon developing those flexibility markets is really important to that flexibility piece. And finally, as this webinar is also based on EV, and I will just highlight that EV is not my specialty, but we've seen some big connections between EV and solar and energy storage in particular. So as you have increased tariffs that allow for flexible charging, we're seeing the flexibility piece really grow within the UK, and that's really important for us. So we're seeing opportunities develop at the moment for those of EVs to use their battery to interact with their home energy storage system and allowing the battery to charge the energy storage device, then power their home, but also the other way around. So we're seeing both vehicle to grid and vehicle to battery as a potential market that's really developing in this space. We're also seeing on more commercial side, so looking at depots and the potential there to interact both using a potential for EV charge points there, interacting with energy storage devices and solar systems to create quite a holistic renewable source of energy that can then provide charge points for those of EVs. And there's a big potential there that we're seeing for a flexibility market to develop, but it's still quite nascent and we're really looking to develop this piece. The final part that I'll mention, because I'm running out of time, is the domestic piece and energy storage on that. This is another big area that we're focused on. I think it's really important to highlight. So over the last year, or really since the start of the energy crisis, we've seen a huge uptake in the installation of solar devices in households, and that has become a big market for us. And as part of that, and really to maximize the potential of solar with this increased demand, we're then really pushing the case for energy storage devices to be part of that, but also EV to be able to provide that interaction that I was talking about earlier. So there's a bit of work that we're doing on that at the moment, including trying to ensure consistency with VAT exemptions that's applied for certain energy saving materials, which solar is included in, but not battery storage. We did see in the autumn statement yesterday that there might be some announcements around that, but we're still looking out for the technologies that will be included in that. So that's a quite high level overview of the current market and some of the policy aspects to it. I'm happy to answer any questions at the end around that, but I'll now move on to the next presenter.
Thank you very much. I particularly was interested in that insight you raised earlier on around the sort of the gap in the UK, and basically part of what we're discussing anyway on this call is how we can all participate to help alleviate that gap and constraints on the grid. So really insightful. Thanks, Jordan. Right, so just quickly introduce myself. I'm Mike Strahlman, Senior Vice President at Piclo. I'm responsible for our market access products, and I'll tell you more about that in a few slides' time. Next slide, please. So just to get started, I wanted to reinforce a few of the messages that Jordan shared. As we know, as the UK transitions to net zero, we have huge volumes of distributed energy resources plugging into the grid. And on top of this, with the increasing electrification across domestic and commercial infrastructure, it's putting an increased pressure on the grid structure and ecosystem itself. In parallel to this, the system operators or grid operators are looking for ways to lower their emissions as well as integrate this growing number of assets onto the grid network. Rather than adding more grid infrastructure like poles, wires, and transformers, there are alternative ways to managing these constraints on the grid. And specifically, we want to talk about flexibility. So by coordinating and procuring capacity from assets connected to the grid, grid operators can deliver material infrastructure investment savings, as well as alleviate these constraints on the network in local congestion areas. And for our part, that's where Piclo comes in. Next slide, please. So the Piclo platform offers a marketplace connecting the flex buyer, in this case, the grid operator, to the flex seller, the flex service provider. On the Piclo Flex platform, a flex provider can view active procurement events or competitions, load up their assets, and participate in these events to not only alleviate grid constraints, but also extract value from the capacity of their assets. As it stands today, the Piclo Flex platform offers access for flex providers to competitions across the UK with 4 grid operators, NPG, ENWL, SPEN, and UKPN, as well as the local constraint market with the National Grid ESO. But more on this and how it's evolving later on. Next slide. So how does this work? On the screen here, you can see the typical end-to-end cycle of participation in a competition. At the start, a system operator conducts a network constraint analysis, and having identified a constraint, they publish a procurement requirement on the platform or on our platform. From the flex provider side, involvement starts first with registration and qualification. If you're new to our platform, you'll have to register and upload asset information into the platform. And from there, you will be able to see if your assets fall within the competition zones loaded up by the system operator. In fact, our platform notifies you of this as well, so that keeps things nice and easy. The next step is qualification. The system operator requires a technical qualification as well as a know your customer commercial qualification step prior to participation in any competition. This is relatively straightforward and is facilitated by our platform ecosystem. The next part is the fun part. Once you're qualified, a flex provider can bid on a procurement event, and following the closure of the bidding window, you'll be notified of competition results. Our platform facilitates then the dispatch services and settlement process to ensure that the system operator receives the capacity they require and have procured, and the flex provider is paid for the delivery of that service. All of this is managed via our platform UI, but also can be automated via API access across all stages of the process. Next slide. So why should you participate? I'll let our guests share their experiences, but fundamentally, participating in local flex markets adds value or a new value stream to your assets. For both your existing asset portfolio as well as planned assets, loading them into our ecosystem will surface value opportunities for your assets. And what's more, it's pretty simple and it's free to use. The last thing I'll say on this slide is that our system operator partners host a series of both short-term competitions, like the local constraint market, which looks at day-ahead or intraday competitions with the ESO, as well as long-term competitions with procurement happening from months to several years in advance of the need. So as a flex provider, you have the runway to make the best choice of where and how to route capacity and extract value from the opportunities that are available to you. Next slide, please. So let's now talk about the current opportunities in the UK flex market. So we have 3 live opportunities on the platform. With ENWL, the qualification window is between the 30th of October and the 26th of Jan, and they're procuring 413 megawatts of capacity with a value of around 7 million to be awarded across 29 locations in their region. For SPEN, qualification is still open until the 8th of December, and they are procuring 298 megawatts across 575 locations in their area. Whilst UKPN's qualification is closed, bidding for their competition opens soon on the 11th of December, and SPEN's also starts on the 11th of December with a short turnaround window as it closes on December 15th. For ENWL, you have a little bit more time as bidding window opens between the 12th and the 23rd of February. I'll pause here. It's a lot of information, but to give you just a chance to soak in all of that. And suffice to say, there is lots of value available to flex providers to take advantage of. In total, around 1.5 gigawatts of capacity with an estimated value of over 27 million across thousands of locations. So definitely load your assets up into the platform, take a look, and get involved. Next slide, please. To find out more information, here are a few links and call outs to the information that's available on the web, be it specific information on the system operators and their competitions in the system operator profiles page, or for training and support, which is offered via Piclo's customer support and delivery teams, as well as by email or through our Piclo Academy for training courses and onboarding support. Next slide. Finally, from me, some hot news off the press. We are proud to announce Piclo Max, which is our brand new interface for flex providers, enabling these flex providers and sellers to access all energy and flexibility markets in a single place. The announcement has just gone live as of 8 a.m. today. The intent of Piclo Max is to do the hard work of integrating with every market on your behalf. Instead of signing up to hundreds of different platforms and portals, as a flex seller, you can access everything in one single place. What does that mean right now? Well, I said earlier that we connect to 4 of the 6 DNOs in the UK, but that's about to change. When we launch in early 2024, for the first time ever, you will be able to access all UK flexibility markets in a single place, right here via Piclo Max. Our vision here is to give you the opportunity to maximize the value of your assets across all markets through a seamless and efficient experience. We're super excited about this, and we hope you are too. For more information, do contact me personally after the session, as well as visit our website to register for early access to Piclo Max when it launches early next year. Right, enough from me. I'll hand you over to Will from EV Energy, one of our experienced FSPs, and also is set to be one of our early adopters of the new Piclo Max platform. He's here to share some of his top tips on participating in flex services. So Will, over to you.
Great, thank you, Mike. Thank you for having me on the webinar today. Good morning to everyone. It's nice to see a few familiar faces as well on the attendee list. I'm William Goldsmith. I head up grid and data services at EV Energy. We're a global EV charging platform operating, originally founded in the UK and now working across the UK, North America, wider Europe, and other new markets like Australia. We go on to the next slide. So EV Flex is our virtual power plant. We provide end-to-end software to help manage EV charging, making it simpler, greener, and cheaper for electric vehicle drivers, and connecting the whole ecosystem of charge point manufacturers, vehicle OEMs, EV drivers, and electric utilities. We were founded in 2018 and have been actively engaged in developing the flexibility markets, including a lot of DSO market work in the UK since then. First started working with Piclo back in 2019. We won the world's best energy startup back in 2019 as well, but are now just post Series B, so more of a scale-up operation and really moving away from innovation into full commercialization. That said, we still do a lot of innovation. So some of the points Jordan mentioned around EVs and solar, we've got a full EV solar product. We're doing a lot on bidirectional charging as well. But today I'm going to be mainly talking about V1G or one directional smart charging, which we are delivering commercial flexibility with. Overall, we've got over 120,000 electric vehicle drivers on our platform and are working with over 40 different clients, utilities, chargers, and OEMs around the world. To the next slide, please. As I mentioned, the ecosystem of EVs is made up of OEMs, so the cars themselves, the people making the cars, the charge points, the infrastructure needed to charge the vehicles, and then that's sort of on the asset side. And then on the grid side, you've got the networks, energy networks and system operators, and then the energy retailers or the supply business. And as EV Energy, we kind of sit in the middle, helping enable better customer propositions and enabling energy flexibility by connecting all those electric vehicles with the energy system. To the next slide. So super simplified. In terms of the types of like grid flexibility, the value that we can add to the energy system, there's three main buckets. Again, within this, there's much more detail depending on the market and different kind of services that are available. But at a top level, we've got energy matching, so balancing supply and demand. This includes wholesale market optimization and optimizing against different energy tariffs. So we do this with like static time of use, dynamic time of use, and now type of use tariffs as well. There's whole system services, so with TSOs or the ESO in the UK, where we're providing reserve services, potential for some frequency response, and also playing in the balancing mechanism. And then network management, which applies more really at the local constraint market Mike mentioned, so national grid, this does happen at transmission level as well, but particularly with the DSOs, helping to manage local constraints on the grid down at a substation, down at a transformer level. So we can really hyper target groups of assets within our virtual power plant to deliver very targeted grid support. Next slide, please. So our virtual power plant EV Flex connects chargers and vehicles to the platform. We automate charging control, provide a customer experience. We can do the front end, or we integrate via API and just provide back-end support. We collect all the data and authorization from end consumers in compliance with full GDPR, data protection and cybersecurity. With all the metadata, we then aggregate that and then use platforms like Piclo to bid that aggregated assets into different markets. So local flexibility markets, which is the key thing today, but also then with some different utilities integrating directly into utility DERMS platforms, which is quite common in the US, or with energy market trading. So we might integrate with an energy retailer's trading desk. On to the next slide, please. So as in kind of the new world of software and cloud-based systems, everything is API-based, which makes it very flexible and enables us to work with partners in different ways. What's quite unique about EV Energy compared to some companies doing similar things in the market is we integrate at both ends of the cable. So we integrate both with vehicles directly through their telematics, so talking to the vehicle through the app and their GSM SIM cards. And we also talk directly to the charge points, the smart charge points, which allows us to do more interesting things, provides greater flexibility. Next slide. So what a lot of people care about in flexibility is, okay, this sounds cool, you're helping the grid, but where's the money? So in terms of the revenue flows, as our virtual power plant, we act as a specialist aggregator for electric vehicle assets, where unlike traditional forms of flexibility in industrial and commercial, we've got an end consumer, an end driver. So they're really the person that owns the asset that needs to give their consent to participate in these things. So engaging and incentivizing EV drivers and end consumers is a huge part of this that we specialize in. So part of the payment goes to the driver, and then the remaining revenue is split between EV Energy and the asset originator partner. So on more to the cool stuff, rather than just explaining the concept, in terms of actually doing, we delivered the first commercial DSO service from domestic EVs with UKPN in 2021. And since then have been scaling with UKPN, now National Grid Electricity Distribution, and other DSOs. So far this year, we've been dispatched over nearly 4,000 times now. What that represents is, for UKPN, all this data is publicly available as well on the DSO websites, but 60% of UKPN dispatches have been EV Energy. So although there's a lot of people bidding into the market, we're one of the few that are actively delivering response on a regular basis. Onto the next slide. Oh, I've lost the slide deck there. It's just probably coming up again. While we find the slides again, I think part of the reason why we're so active in the markets, as well as the kind of technology stack and enablement, like scale is really key to this. So with DSO services, because they're very spread apart, you need sort of tens of thousands of assets minimum really in the UK to have the density of assets to really get the value from them. And so actually by pooling together groups of assets owned by different charger manufacturers or OEMs or different groups of people, we're able to extract a lot more value, and that's due to the minimum capacities that these DSOs have, and also just the scale of the assets in the UK today. So when we talk about sort of better together and aggregation, it really is a win-win, where as well as simplifying things and providing access to markets, we can actually create more revenue than for people than operating independently. UK DSO services, so we can now actually say UK beyond GB. We've started working with Northern Ireland electricity networks. We're working with 4 out of the 7, and I think with the new tenders Mike shared, I think that's soon to be all 7, which is very exciting. A lot of that again has been UKPN and National Grid electricity distribution. Just if you look at in terms of the centres of the country where they are around London, the southeast and the Midlands, that's where a lot of high population density, high grid flexibility need, and quite a lot of EVs are there. So they're really the 2 DSOs that we've started with, but now expanding across the whole of the UK. Next slide. Outside of the UK, Europe's also very exciting too. It's where Piclo is also active. So in Portugal and Italy, we're starting to do more now in the Netherlands, Germany and other markets. So really transferring the knowledge and learnings from the UK, working together with folks like Piclo, and taking some of the great innovation and learning from the UK into other markets as well, which is particularly interesting. Like a lot of charger manufacturers or OEMs are now multi-market or global businesses. Next slide. So my final slide. don't have time to go into all the details, but in terms of revenue opportunity, there is money and revenue on the table today, albeit still fairly modest in the UK. We're talking around £70 per electric vehicle per year as the total value that can be unlocked. But remember, quite a lot of that needs to go back to the end EV driver who owns the asset. But we're seeing that sort of from 2025 and beyond, particularly as we get the increase of market-wide half-hourly settlement, that value is going to be increasing to over £300 per year. So at scale, this is a really sizable revenue opportunity. One of the key things to unlocking this is standardizing things across markets, across different platforms, enabling revenue stacking. And that's why we're really excited to continue working with Piclo and about Piclo Max, not only, I think, as a tool that will kind of simplify the bidding and the participation process, but in actually bringing multiple markets onto one platform. I'm also quite hopeful and optimistic that that will help to consolidate and standardize some of the product designs and some of the market access requirements simply by bringing it into one place. So back over to Mike.
Will, thanks for that. Really appreciate it. And I think the bit that really strikes me again about the platform is just not only are you able to get sort of drivers involved in helping with the specific challenges of the grid, but it's also handing value back to the drivers through engaging with these markets. So it's really compelling. So thank you for that. Right, I'll pass over to Jack Breen from Electricity to share some of your experiences in participating with local flex competitions as well. Jack, over to you.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Mike. And thanks very much for having me, everyone. Jack Breen, I'm the head of operations for Electricity in the UK, and also very involved on the energy procurement and flexibility side of things. So, just on the next slide, please. Thanks. So Electricity, for those who aren't aware, is the largest public EV charging network in the UK, so offering on-street charging, typically focused at overnight residential. So we operate in that 5 kilowatt-hour range on our charge points. Really, our journey with Piclo started in 2022, so sort of towards the end of the year, where we introduced smart charging on our network. And our real aim was to give those without access to off-street parking, access to that cheaper off-peak tariffs that have become synonymous with domestic charging, as Will was discussing on EV energy. So really sort of leveraging that playing field and ensure that it's not just restricted to those with driveway and private charge points. So what does smart charging really mean and how does it work? So on the Electricity network, you plug in, you commence your charging session, and you have the option with, as shown on the right-hand side here, to skip times of higher demand and therefore higher pricing on our network. Just go to the next slide, please. So great. This is gives a very brief visualization of sort of how it's implemented. But the user will plug in sort of a standard price anywhere from 10 a.m. and has the option to skip that peak price window of 3 hours from 4 to 7 p.m., which is aligned with the times of high demand that we typically see flexibility services being sort of engaged with at that point with constraints on the grid. Next slide, please. Sorry, I think just go back one. Great. So how do we get involved in flexibility? So we've got smart charging, we've rolled out that development on our network, but our goal for 2023 was really to see how we can reduce our consumption further during these peak times and ensure that we offer customers predominantly the off-peak price, sort of our standard price. So simultaneously, we came along across Piclo and the UKPN competitions where a lot of our charging network is. And the competition was aligned with our reduction or our peak price time and our smart charging window of 4:30 to 7 p.m. Next slide, please. So very briefly, high level, the competition itself was in Westminster in a UKPN DSO area and is active across 200 charge points. So Will's already mentioned the sort of having to pull these assets and really gain that benefit. So this was a small volume versus our total network of over 7,500 now. But it's specific to Westminster. And as I mentioned, it was to reduce consumption during that window where we have the ability for users to skip peak pricing and that sort of peak time of charging across the winter period. Next slide, please. The lessons learned. We're at the very beginning of this journey, but I think it's important to share the learnings we've had so far. So I would strongly encourage anyone who's interested in the flexibility services side of things to work with the DSO that is raising the competition and with Piclo to help establish the requirements for the qualification required on your individual assets and the information needed to engage in the competition. And this is a trial for us. It's only 200 charge points, and we're at the very beginning of this journey, particularly in the public EV charging space. I think we're sort of really leading the way there. But we believe it's really important to incentivize this behavior. So especially in those sort of non-domestic areas that are sort of at risk of being left behind, as we don't have that much control on sort of the user behavior. Longer term, we'd really like to grow this trial and use these incentives to better our technology, better our smart charging offer to customers, and pass these benefits back to the consumer. And Piclo is essential there. So essential partner to sort of help charge point operators aggregate their individual assets across various markets with Piclo Max, and generate the value through sort of mass adoption. And Ubitricity is active across 4 countries, so very excited to hear about the developments on Piclo Max and maybe some of the flexibility services we're going to have across 4 markets. That's it from me, I think. Yeah, thank you very much.
Jack, thank you very much. I really appreciate that. And again, I love the project you're doing in the peak load shifting piece. It's really important for not only the industry, but again, the vision of bringing that back to value for the end consumer. So important. So I'm really excited to see that from you guys and also see that continue to expand. Really great stuff. So I think we're at the point now in the presentation or in the webinar where we move to Q&A. So first of all, thank you to all of the speakers for making time for us and for sharing your insights and thoughts. We have about 15-20 minutes now to do that. So please pop any questions that you have into the chat within Teams, and open to taking those questions now. Don't be shy.
You've obviously explained EV flexibility so well, Mike. But
yeah, I mean, well done to all of us, I suppose. Yeah. Thursday morning, it's Thanksgiving, in the US. Maybe people have started eating their turkey already on this side of the pond. Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to jump in actually with a question for Jack, if that's okay, while some others get going. Really cool. Smart charging, just so taking EV energy hat on a personal level, I live in Brighton. I own an EV. I don't have access to off-street parking. It's a challenge. It's a nightmare. I think one of the biggest challenges, there's still quite a few, that EV adoption faces at the moment is people without access to on-street parking. The price of charging in Brighton off-street is like 70 pence per kilowatt hour, like mile for mile. That's more than petrol. Which is not something I like saying too loudly or on webinars without a small group of industry people, but that's just like terrifying. And it's a pain in the ass. So I think smart charging on street is super critical. It's something sort of out. We focus on the home, but we're now starting to do. We're doing a project with UKPN, actually in Brighton, Project Lightspeed. But would be super interested to hear just about the kind of key challenges that you've had with that, or the vision, I guess, you have for that going forwards.
Yeah, of course. I mean, like any sort of changes in anything to do with pricing and user behavior and sort of adoption of those things, there are sort of conceptual challenges about how, for us, it's local authorities being one of our clients and also the end user, sort of understanding that shift from flat price per kilowatt hour to this sort of more dynamic time-based tariffs. So a lot of it is educational. I think it's educating the user and educating for us, as I mentioned, sort of local authorities and councils. Sort of this is where the shift is, and this is where the real benefit to the customer lies, to offer them that lower pricing and to empower them almost to understand where that comes from and how we can sort of mitigate that and allow customers access to pricing, which, as I mentioned, sort of typically reserved for those with off-street parking, home charges, and avoid situations like you mentioned, Will, where prices are very high at all periods during the day for on-street charging.
Great, thanks. Will's asked a question, Will Root, I think to me, so I can go ahead and answer that. In terms of, there's I showed a slide showing a dramatic increase in forecast revenues after around 2025. And the question was, what's driving that increase? Is it new service availability? So most of the value today is really with the DSO markets, and that's because you do not need to be an energy supplier to access these markets. So we have something in the UK called the supplier hub model, where the supplier in many cases is the gatekeeper to delivering the energy and the flexibility asset. With Ubitricity and Shell together, that maybe helps you a little bit, I'm not sure. So that's kind of one reason. The second is half-hourly settlement. So at the moment, most meters are settled, residential meters are settled on a profile class, which is sort of an estimate of when energy is used throughout the day. With the rollout of smart meters, we're moving to half-hourly settlements, the price of energy changing every half hour. Unfortunately, energy suppliers were tasked with doing that rollout, and it has been complicated and there's been setbacks, but market-wide half-hourly settlement now looks to be delayed beyond 2025, potentially 2027. So several markets like the balancing mechanism require assets to be, those meters behind the scenes, to be half-hourly settled. So from 2025 onwards, I guess the key thing we're seeing is a service stacking. So beyond local flex and DSO services, stacking those with ESO and system level services. And then there's some key policy changes. So P375, which is allowing independent aggregators to access the balancing mechanism. And then more recently, P415, which enables independent aggregators to trade and access the wholesale market. So that as well is another key thing that will increase the value. In the numbers I shared, actually, that was all system and energy balancing. It did not include wholesale market optimization. So that P415 policy is quite new, and that potentially increases the potential value capture even more, which is really exciting. Hopefully I've answered your question.
There is another question that's come through. Thank you, Will, for that, from Mike Barker. So the IEEE have a task force looking at flex metrics. What metrics are important to VPPs and aggregators, and how are they related to individual residential units, homes, etc.? Probably Will, that may be directed at you first, but maybe others have a view as well.
Yeah, so what metrics are important for VPPs? So I guess the key metric that we look at is in kilowatts of power. It's kind of instantaneous power. What's the average number of kilowatts we have available per electric vehicle on the platform? So EVs are not plugged in all the time. People typically plug in and charge 2 to 3 times a week. But what we've found through trialing and then just doing this stuff commercially is that once you get to a scale of even as small as 50 assets in a small region, but then it massively kind of increases statistically as you grow, is that you're from 50 assets onwards up to into the thousands, we can then easily predict when people are going to be. It's very difficult to predict what one person is going to do, much easier to predict the average of 100. So that helps, and we're able to predict the kilowatts of flex per EV. Within that, prediction in our virtual power plant software, we then have the ability to turn down as well as turn up. So a lot of what we've spoken about, say most DSO markets to date have been turn down services, so reducing demand to relieve network congestion. But more and more UK power networks and some others now are doing demand turn up, so paying people to turn up to soak up excess renewable generation on the grid to prevent the curtailment of renewables. And the local capacity constraint market, that National Grid are doing in Scotland, the Scottics border with Piclo, is another example of that turn-up service. What that means, though, is like the availability, we typically say around 1 kilowatt per EV of flexible capacity. That's turn down capacity over the evening peak. But for each half hour of the day, the ability to turn up and down depends on how many vehicles we've got plugged in, and varies with time of day. So what's kind of really key as well is as new services come along, is to ensure that the service windows are specific enough. So the smallest, I guess, granular they can be is like 30-minute service windows for each settlement period. So we can provide inflex for each settlement period. With more legacy systems where it's like just turning up gas or coal power generation to provide a response, you've got your service window might be a whole morning or a whole night. It might be like 6 hours long. A 6 hours long service window for an asset like an electric vehicle isn't great because we can only bid in the minimum capacity of that 6 hours. Whereas if we're able to bid in kind of at each hour, we can provide a much more kind of reliable service that reflects the availability of that asset class. So I'd say that's one of the, I hope I've understood the question, but that's sort of one of the key things, is understanding the flexible capacity available in each time period and then having products that enable us to bid in for more specific targeted time periods.
And I think what's also exciting to layer on that, Will, is indeed as V2X or V2G technology comes in, then you get the bidirectional piece. So that improves the ability to treat the EV connected to your to the wall box as a omnidirectional battery rather than just as one directional. So that further improves the opportunity space. I've got a question that's come in from Hannes. 2 bigger FSPs already present here with their concrete approaches. Curious what other potential candidates do you see emerging, and what does it take to shift from being only a tech company to becoming a full flex provider? And there's a follow-up, but I'll open that to the floor. Maybe Jack, you want to take a crack at that one?
So what does it take to become a full flex provider? So we're doing it really on a trial basis at the moment, with the aim in, as Mike's already established, with the UKPN competitions open at the moment, with the aim of growing that. I think it doesn't need to be that binary. The benefit with the Piclo platform is that you can see these competitions arise in small areas where there are, in our case, where we have individual charge point or demand side assets, with this sort of very recent technological improvement of offering smart charging to customers. So the opportunity was really there, and it's already been established. It's low risk. For the charge point operator, the flexibility service provider. They try to incentivize it where possible with the DSO, and I think understanding, as Will's already mentioned, the difficulty, and I very much agreed, is understanding how much flexible capacity there is on a turn down element, which is what we offer, and that's the challenge. But really assessing it on a small volume, like for us across 200 charge points, is a fantastic entrance into it.
And just sorry, go on, Will, go ahead.
Yeah, maybe building on that, and agree with everything Jack said. I think some of this, like the Piclo Max work, some things are getting easier in this space in terms of being able to provide flexibility, but equally in other areas it's getting harder. So we're kind of really here to just get as many EVs connected to the energy system as possible and adopt very much a partnership approach. But I would definitely encourage anyone thinking about getting into this space, be happy to have a chat. One of the key things for more technology providers, whether that's like a charging manufacturer or other technology company, being a flex provider is there's a lot of complex software required. And in terms of the requirements, so the Smart Secure Energy System consultation that DESNZ are working through at the moment, there are plans for, in the next couple of years, regulations to come out for load controllers. So anyone controlling more than 300 megawatts of load, which is quite, we're basically there today, will then be treated as critical national infrastructure. So any software stack that you build to provide flexibility will need to meet CNI standards, have incredibly high levels of cybersecurity, and a bunch of other complex stuff. So in a similar way that Piclo is kind of building out the market interface integration side, we're building out that virtual power plant software that will enable people with assets to plug into it and monetize them without having to invest millions of pounds into developing those complex capabilities.
Thank you, Will and Jack. I had a follow-up, but let me. There are a couple more questions that have come in, so let me add those into the mix here. So there's one from Anthony. Curious to know how on-street smart charging will balance with consumer demand for a charge where demand exceeds charging capacity, e.g., someone connected to a charger through a peak period but not charging, blocking another user from a peak charge. So I think, Jack, that one's for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it is a challenge, of course. Like anything where we're introducing different or changing user behavior. I think what we've seen is I mean, I've got some at the top of my head, I think. So the average plug-in time for any electricity charge point is over 9.5 hours. So really focused on that overnight charging in residential areas. Whereas our typical charging time is 4.5 hours. So you can see that there's this window where the flexibility service is sort of quite key for us, and we can unlock that. I think our charge points are really focused on that overnight period. So I agree that the challenge is certainly there, where you have people stopping off for 20 minutes and sort of use behavior which is more synonymous with rapid and fast charging. But our product seems to be sort of we've cornered the market in terms of offering those without off-street parking a direct alternative sort of outside their house.
Thank you, Jack. I think we have time for one more question before we wrap up. And Anthony, this is another one from you. With V2G anticipated to come in volume quite soon, any insights around how flexibility will be impacted by battery warranty parameters from auto OEMs? Great question.
Great question. Yeah, we're working with a lot of OEMs on this at the moment. Generally, the overwhelming kind of data around this is that exporting from your battery back into your home or the grid, particularly if you're doing this at like 7 kilowatts, like a kind of normal home charging speed, has minimal to no battery degradation issues. In some cases, if managed nicely, can even improve your battery health. So we're very optimistic with the OEMs that we can get there on this eventually. It's really sort of a commercial legal issue and challenge. A lot of it relates to how the EU law and also in the US, they apply warranties to OEMs based on mileage. So the whole concept of mileage is based on a clock, but by exporting, you're effectively doing more mileage on your battery. And it's more of a challenge about how it's measured and communicated. Where this is really obvious is basically charging at 150 kilowatts on a rapid charger on a motorway regularly is going to do far, far more in terms of battery degradation than exporting in the home on a regular basis at 7 kilowatts. But the OEMs, but that's included under the battery warranty because people realize you need to be able to do rapid charging. So I'm hoping that we will get to where some common sense will prevail. We published a white paper on this on V2X a couple of months ago, so that's on our website if you're interested in finding out a bit more about it.
Jordan, I don't know if you wanted to add anything else on top of that from sort of the policy perspective before we wrap up.
No, so I think it was covered. Everything just in there. Perfect.
Great. Well, look, for me, I wanted to thank you everyone for attending, and also thanks to our speakers, Jordan, Will, and Jack. Really appreciate you taking the time for us and sharing your insights, not only on participation in flex markets, but also the industry ecosystem and your broader experiences. For everyone who's listening, just a reminder that there are 2 more webinars coming up in our series, so please do attend if you're interested. First is on wind and storage on the 30th of November with Renewable UK. And the second is around domestic demand side response on the 7th of December with Energy. If you're interested, you can also, in our platform, you can book a demo of Piclo Flex with one of our teams using the QR code. And please do go to our website to register your interest for Piclo Max, which is launched today. So thanks, everybody, and have a great rest of your day.